Aloha, welcome to the G'day Sally Show. I'm Sally Squires, entertaining the world. Tonight I'm reading stories from my book, Footsteps to Fairy Forest. One day, when I was 5 years old, I found a map. It was hidden in a rusty jam tin, in between the logs of the woodpile, down behind the rusty door of the garden shed. I had been chasing a blue butterfly, and I fell over the rusty jam tin. As I was getting up, I happened to look inside the tin, and I saw a piece of wrinkly brown paper. So I dusted myself off and I gently pulled out the paper. I was always a bit afraid of spiders, and I didn't want a spider to find my finger inside the rusty jam tin. So I pulled out the paper bit by bit until I had finally got it all out. It was a big map. I had to unfold it carefully because it was old and dusty and I didn't want to tear it. At first I thought it was a treasure map, and maybe it is, but I haven't found the treasure yet. There were a lot of drawings on the map and many footsteps. Just then my grandma called me for tea, so I refolded the map very carefully and put it inside my inside pocket and went in for tea. After I washed my hands, I hid my map inside my favourite book, the one about the angels, so my grandma wouldn't find it. After all, it was my map, my secret map. It took me some time to work out the map. I would have to wait until my grandma said good night and left me to go to sleep, and then I would get out my map and climb up onto the windowsill and unwrap my map and try to work out the clues. I could only read it in the starlight or by the light of the midnight moon while my grandma was asleep. Sometimes the clouds covered up the moon's face, and then I couldn't see anything on my map and I would have to wait until the clouds moved away again. There was a pathway running through the map, and each section of the path had a footstep, and each one of the footsteps had its direction. I decided that as soon as I could, maybe tomorrow, I would see if I could find the first footstep and see if there were any clues around it. My favourite auntie, Auntie Magnolia, had given me a compass for my 5th birthday. She had shown me how to use it, so I hoped that it was going to help me find the first footstep and the first clue. Footstep 1. Early the next morning, right after breakfast, I packed my compass in my pocket and carefully placed the rusty jam tin map into my blue bucket along with my spade and set off to find Fairy Forest. Out by the woodshed, I checked the map to see which way the map was facing and where to start my journey. I had to brush away the spiderweb that almost covered the direction arrow for the first footstep. It said north. Laying down the map on a clear patch of our back path, I lined up my compass to north. Then I put the map down with the north arrow pointing the same way. The first footprint was in a straight line north of where I was, so I started out. The tree branches made shadows on the ground like a staircase as I walked, and it made me feel as if I was going up. The wind started blowing and I almost lost hold of my map, so I refolded it and put it back inside the jam tin, inside my bucket, and held it down with my spade. I hadn't gone far when I came to a creek. The north arrow on my compass pointed straight through the middle of the creek, so I knew I would have to cross it. I walked along the bank for a while to see if there was a bridge anywhere, but there wasn't. Then a stray sunbeam floated down on the water, and I could see big stones like steps just under the water. Taking off my shoes so my toes would grip the stones as I crossed, I held my bucket and spade tightly with my map and compass inside and stepped onto the first stone. The creek water tickled as it flowed through my toes. The first stone held steady, so I stretched out my foot and stepped onto the second one. That one held too, so I gradually made my way across the stream, stone by stone, until I reached the other bank. Checking the north arrow on my compass, I kept walking towards footstep 1. As the sun started to warm me, I followed the line on the map. I must be getting close, I thought, and I stopped and spread out the map on the ground to check. It was just then that I noticed that the sign for footstep 1 on my map was in the shape of a black and white feather, and just as I looked up from the map, I saw a black and white feather on the ground. I picked up the feather and put it in my bucket, and then I moved away some of the dirt. I could feel something hard, so I brushed away more dirt, and then I found a little pebble. I picked it up, and I could see some writing on it. It said footstep 1. I put the pebble in my bucket with the feather. Suddenly I could feel a breeze on my face, and something caught my eye. I saw a bright blue and green flash just near me. I couldn't believe my eyes as I sat down on a rock to see what the blue and green flash was. And you'll never believe it, but a blue and green fairy landed on my hand. She had purple wings. She said her name was ARKONAZIA, and that she was the fairy of the air. And then I fell asleep. ARKONAZIA, the fairy of the air. The fairy of the air, ARKONAZIA, was flying from one cloud to another, checking that they were just the right amount of fluffiness, that they had just the right amount of moisture in each fluffy bundle, and that they were in just the right position for the wind to pick them up and fluff them off to just the right position in the sky. She had just finished doing her daily duty and was flying back to Fairy Forest when she suddenly started to fall out of the sky. Down, down, down she went. Luckily, one of the forest trees saw her falling and reached out its biggest branch to catch her. Whoop went ARKONAZIA as she landed in a pile of leaves. Why did my wings stop working, she thought. I'm the fairy of the air, and I have been flying ever since early this morning. My wings have always worked, so why did they stop working today? ARKONAZIA climbed softly down the tree trunk, thanked the spirit of the tree for saving her, and began to trip lightly back along the pebbled path to Fairy Forest, still wondering why her wings had stopped working. As she stepped from stepping stone to stepping stone through the softly sloping shadows, she hummed to herself. It was a magic tune that she had been taught by a wonderful wise wizard once upon a wintry Wednesday when she had been wishing for the sun to return to the sky. The sun had been missing for a whole day, and as ARKONAZIA was the fairy of the air, she was the fairy who must sing the magic for the sun to return. And as the sun had never disappeared before, she had called on the wonderful wise wizard to help her. What was the wonderful wise wizard's name, I can hear you ask? Well, I'll tell you. The wonderful wise wizard's name was Wendell Pendleberry Wantagenet, and he was wonderfully wise. So Wendell Pendleberry Wantagenet had taught ARKONAZIA Fairy a special secret song so she could sing the sun. And ARKONAZIA had found that whenever there was any kind of trouble in Fairy Forest, then Wendell Pendleberry Wantagenet's special secret song always sprang to her lips like magic. So as ARKONAZIA Fairy stepped lightly from stone to stone, singing Wendell Pendleberry Wantagenet's special secret song, she began to see an amazing scene in her mind's eye. And what could ARKONAZIA see, I can hear you ask? Well, I'll tell you. ARKONAZIA could see an image of a wonky witch, and the wonky witch was talking to her caroling cat as she cast a spell over the flames of the fire. Frizzle, rizzle, and sizzle, said the wonky witch as she threw magic dust into the flames. ARKONAZIA will no more fly through the air. Frizzle, rizzle, and sizzle. And she threw more magic dust into the flames, which exploded with a loud poof. Now you might be wondering just what ARKONAZIA Fairy had done to deserve the wonky witch casting a spell on her, and so I'll tell you. Just yesterday, ARKONAZIA Fairy was flying along quite happily doing her rounds to make sure all the air creatures were well and happy when she came across the wonky witch and her caroling cat. And do you know that wonky witch was catching birds and feeding them to her caroling cat? Well, ARKONAZIA Fairy was not going to allow that to happen. She flew right up to the wonky witch and she sprinkled fairy dust right over the wonky witch's hat. She waved her magic wand, which was made of rainbows and cloud mist, and she said her magic spell. Unicorn universe unusual, wonky witch walking, freeze flying forever, zing zang zong zang zung. The wonky witch froze in midair, and then she fell right out of the sky and landed in a big mud puddle. Wonky witch, said ARKONAZIA, you must stop catching birds and feeding them to your caroling cat, she said. Your caroling cat will have to learn to eat grass, not birds. Well, the wonky witch was not a bit happy at falling out of the sky and being covered in mud, so she swore she would take revenge on ARKONAZIA Fairy, the fairy of the air, and that is exactly what she had done. So that's why my wings have stopped working, thought ARKONAZIA. Now no one knows which magic spells are stronger, The magic spells of a witch like the Wonky Witch, or the magic spells of a fairy like ARKONAZIA? Maybe you know, but I certainly don't. ARKONAZIA stopped in her tracks. Aha, she said to herself, because no one else was listening. I need to create a magic spell to get my wings working again, and then I must think about what to do about that Wonky Witch. So ARKONAZIA thought for a minute and a second. Then, waving her fairy wand, she said her magic spell. Unicorn universe unusual, fairy flying forwards, never failing flying, fip-fop, fap, fip-fop. Suddenly, ARKONAZIA could feel her fairy wings start moving, and before you could say down with wicked witches, she was flying through the air again. As she flew, she began to think about what she should do about the Wonky Witch. Floating just near her was a heart-shaped cloud, so she sat down on it to think about this dilemma. Now, I don't want to start a war with the Wonky Witch, but I do want to stop her from feeding birds to her caroling cat. As the air fluffed up through the clouds, stirring her wings, ARKONAZIA suddenly had the answer. I know what I'll do, she said. I'll put a spell on the Wonky Witch's caroling cat, so that every time she tries to eat birds or insects or any little animals, she'll get sick. Then she will only be able to eat grass from now on, and that way the Wonky Witch won't know that I've put a spell on her cat. ARKONAZIA thought for a minute and a second, and then waving her fairy wand, she said out loud, Unicorn universe unusual. Caroling cat can't catch birds, insects, animals all. Kit cat, cot, ket, cut. Later that day, ARKONAZIA flew down through the forest to check on the Wonky Witch and her caroling cat. She peeped down through a fairy-wort tree, hiding so the witch wouldn't see her. In a small clearing, she could see the witch bent over her cat, which was choking and coughing, and ARKONAZIA could see a little bird fly out from the cat's mouth. The fairy smiled a broad smile, knowing that she had saved her friends the birds from the Wonky Witch and her caroling cat forever. You know, Hawaii is a microcosm of the world, with people here from all over the world. And Noa Hawaii is a microcosm of the traditional arts of the world, with beautiful patterns from many countries. They've been in business for more than 40 years with wonderful Hawaii-designed batik clothing. Their hand-dyed and handmade clothes have patterns that are based on traditional kapa and tapa designs from Hawaii, Polynesia, Micronesia, Indonesia, even New Zealand and Africa. So check out the wonderful items that Noa has on their website, www.noanoahawaii.com. So I'll be back next week, so bye for now.